As you know, over the past year or so, we have seen an increasing rise of anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Asian racism. COVID has given us unleashed and magnified the inequities that already exist in our society. And as a result, the arts community, both before this and continuing through this, is not being silent. And we're honored to be working with a number of organizations and some students who are actually taking on this work and pushing it to the next level. Not fully sure of what the outcomes would be, but wanting to have something that is very different, transformative, engaging, and I suspect following along the lines that Dory just outlined. So we have a panel coming up that is looking at taking the reins. What does it mean to bring about transformative change that addresses anti-racism, equity, pluralism in a time of conflict? Conflict that may be within an organization, but certainly was within a community. And so we have 5 speakers today. Celia Smith, who is the CEO of Luminato. Nathaniel Hanula James, a recent graduate of the Humber Arts Program, Arts Administration Program. He and his colleagues have been doing some work with mass culture, and we'll talk about that. Their work has been involved in looking at Indigenous, Black, people of color art service organizations. And I'm putting the link to their work in the chat room if you want to look at it later. Barry Hewson, the Executive Director of the National Ballet of Canada. CPAMO and the National Ballet have been working together for almost 3 years now, looking at incredibly transformative pieces of change that are happening within the organization. Ilta Ibrahimov of Fall for Dance North, another organization that has taken on the challenge of looking at these issues during this time. And Kelly Strawn of Workman Arts, again, another organization taking up the challenge in this day and age. We're going to start with Celia, and then that'll be followed by Nathaniel, Barry, Ilter, and Kelly. So what will happen is Celia will speak for maybe about 10 minutes, and then we'll open the floor through the chat room only for questions or comments. And I would suggest you send your question or comment to me directly so I don't lose it in the many things that are being posted in the chat room. I will read the question out or the comment to the speaker, and we'll then proceed to the next speaker. Celia, can I turn it over to you?
Thank you, Charles. So audio check, you can hear me? We're good? Yes, great. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I clearly have a big podium to fill. That was a tremendous first hour, so thank you so much for that. And Dory in particular, just to call out to you, really inspirational and challenging and exciting. Your storytelling to us this morning is fantastic. So it's a great pleasure to be here with all of you. I feel quite inadequate, but I did volunteer to go first. So the good news is I get this over with quickly. And thank you, Charles, Kevin, and the entire team at CPAMO for organizing these 3 brilliant days for all of us to gather and to learn and to listen to each other. So my name is Celia, and I lead Luminato, and it's a multidisciplinary arts festival that's rooted here in Toronto and serves the people of this region, the artists, the audiences, and the communities, and also, I would say, the world, by sharing and engaging with art that helps us understand and connect with each other. That might not be the vision that you've heard from Luminato in the past, but that's what I'm saying today, and that's where I would like to go in the future. I think arts and culture, I see it as setting the table for the big conversations that we all need to have. And we might be the salt at the table. We might be the salt in the stew. We might be the salt in the wound. But I think we collectively are the catalyst that can provoke and provide the platform for all of us to gather and get on with it. I also have been thinking about, as we emerge from this prolonged trauma and constraint of the pandemic, how we will need a moment, many moments, to mourn the loss that has been endured individually and collectively through this time. We will need a time of celebration, and then we're going to need to get back to work. So what we're all doing through this time, and as we come through this, how are we setting ourselves up to do that, and to do that for our entire communities, all communities, not perhaps who we thought we were serving as we went into this tunnel. So Charles and Kevin asked us to speak on a panel about the challenges and conflicts that may arise as we, as institutions, address systemic change. And I have to say, I did wonder how we were each going to keep it to the requisite 10 minutes, because it's clearly a vast and complex topic. And I will tell you, I have questions and very few solutions. So you be prepared to be disappointed, but maybe provoked. I joined Luminato almost a year ago. It was June the 1st. It was 4 days after George Floyd was murdered. And I encountered an organization, an arts community, and a society that was reckoning with systemic racism in such a public and visceral way, like perhaps it had never before. And expectations for significant change were and remain very high. And will remain that way, I think, and hope forever. In recent years, in particular at Luminato, we had, I think it's fair to say, a fairly strong track record of presenting diverse programming from a wide range of artists from the Toronto arts community and from around the world, and tackling some of the big topics of our time. However, the leadership team, when I looked at the leaders, the board of directors, the audiences, the supporters, this group was almost entirely white. And when I talked to former staff members, they told me of the systemic barriers they had faced and the challenges that they had experienced working with us and why they were no longer working with us. I spoke to a wide variety of artists and arts organization leaders, supporters, funders, community leaders. And I also heard about an organization that was insular, rigid, and just not open to the plurality of the Toronto community. This may be a familiar story to many of you. And, perhaps we could talk about all the efforts that we all in all of our organizations have been making, perhaps in the last year, perhaps for many years, perhaps more recently. All the efforts we've been making on comprehensive anti-racism, equity, pluralism changes in our organizations. The changes we have made to our staff and contractor and board teams, our efforts at recruitment, possibly not as brilliant as what Dean Dorey had outlined, but our efforts there, our collective efforts to make these places safe and inclusive for everyone. But as Dean Runstall said, diversity is not enough. And even I think efforts at safety is not enough. I mean, that has to be a very minimal bar, really. We've been doing our work with CPAMO over the course of the last several months in understanding the systemic racism that's embedded in our current situation, the public and internal perceptions of our work, our policies, our practices. We've asked for honest feedback from our staff, our volunteers, our artists about how it is to work with us now and how it could be. We're working on an action plan, which I'm sure many of you are working on that action plan. I could also talk about the individual learning that's taken place, the collective sharing of perspectives and knowledge, the training in anti-racism, microaggression, conflict resolution that we have held, the inspirational speakers that we've listened to. And I'm not diminishing any of this. It's been extraordinary work. And it's all really good work. And it's been undertaken in a spirit of personal accountability and collective responsibility. But Charles and Kevin wanted us to talk about the challenge of making this systemic change, not just what we did, but what's happening as a result and what are the ongoing challenges when we are taking baby steps. We're at the beginning of a lifelong, eternal process. So speaking personally, we continue to encounter huge conflict situations, and there are no easy answers or resolutions. Despite intensive work, I think that trauma that each of us carry and past behavior that has been tolerated runs so deep that it is unacceptable, but not unexpected, that we still cause significant pain to each other. With the best of intentions, we still trip up. And so how do we deal with this? It requires like significant individual work and significant organizational change. I want to share 4 examples, sort of 4 areas I've been thinking about where we have so much work to do. And you can ask me questions. I may or may not have answers, but I'd love you to consider these. And you know, if in the future you have any comments for me, please share. The first is that when I talk about us setting the table to talk about the large issues of our day, that we're the salt in the wound, the salt in the stew, the fact is we are creating and sharing work that can be traumatic for the creators to create and traumatic for audiences to experience. This is not easy work. We want to create work that speaks to the issues of our time, that puts these big issues out for all of us to see and to understand and to empathize, to take action, to be shocked, to be illuminated. But this process can be devastating for all of us. So what responsibility do we have to both, to the creators and to the people who experience it? How do we hold compassion and care on both sides? How do we not shy away from these issues because it's so painful, but how do we carry it? We've been working on a project that will come to light and view in many projects, but one of them in particular that will come to light in the fall. And the process for the artist working on this has become so difficult that I wonder how it's ever going to actually come to light. And this is their own process and their work, but there are just so many layers to the trauma of articulating it. A second area is, how do we own and take responsibility, as Dean Jory said, for both the perceptions of our organization's pasts and the facts of our organization's pasts and the experiences that people have had with us in the past? How do we own that? Although we personally had nothing to do with it, but our organization did. How do we own that and take responsibility for it? How do we accept and acknowledge and atone for that, for the past, while we also move forward and don't stay in the past? How do we move forward with integrity and bravery and both patience and urgency? Not to say, oh yeah, forget about it, now we're new, but we do have a chance to renew and to do things differently. So how do we carry that balance? How are we accountable and we remember? And how do we move resolutely to the future, but not too quickly? Advice I got from some of my teammates early on was, Celia, hurry up and slow down. I'm like, wow, man, you guys are, what are you telling me? I was moving too quickly. I was also not moving quickly enough. So how do you balance that? How do you make third point, how do you make an ethically motivated structural shift, a transformative shift in how we're set up, in our governance, in our decision-making, in our value system? You know, we've all had many discussions, no doubt, about the potential for enormous shifts in power and structure in how we run organizations in general, but I'm speaking about arts organizations. Who gets to decide how much, when, for whom? For some people, the whole system has to go. And for others, they believe that we can adapt to a more inclusive and just future. How many of us have really figured out what this future could look like? How do we have these intensive, courageous conversations while we're so distracted with the everyday grind of getting stuff done? Do you ever feel that people are really up for the conversation, but not for the reality of the power shift? I think about conversations I've had both internally with the staff team, externally with our board members, with donors who will tell you that they're into this, but the reality of it, I don't think they are. So how do we get us beyond the talking? I love some of the points that Dean Tunstall shared, but I think that the reality of a power shift is way bigger than most of us are able to grasp. How do we actively change the power structure, and not within just our organizations, but in our larger communities. And then the fourth one is an obvious one, but man, like we're living it every day, aren't we? It's how do we transform internal culture in the midst of such enormous individual and collective stress? You know, I have never met in person most of the people that I work with because, as I said, I started last June. Yet I'm asking them to share the responsibility for huge dramatic changes, to be honest and vulnerable on Zoom, and to manage the day-to-day alongside a future vision, all the while dealing with extraordinary personal stress. And the work that we all want to produce keeps being thwarted. So we're producers, we just want to produce, and we can't produce. So people's patience and stamina are at an all-time low. So how in the midst of all of that do we fully manifest ourselves? How do they trust me? Why should they trust me? How do I even know what I'm dealing with? I said the other day, I feel like I'm conducting an orchestra with the lights off, you know? And I don't have an answer to these challenges, and nor do I offer a panacea for the conflict that arises from this, because continual daily conflict as a result of these and many other sort of, you know, ecological constraints and challenges that we're facing. But I do think that maybe I'd like to say, isn't this actually the perfect time to address this kind of seismic shift? Some days it feels like the world has stopped turning on its axis. When we come out of this shared time of constraint, will we be limp from exhaustion? You know, we're like this right now. Will we be like this? Can you see my hands? Hopefully. Or are we going to burst forth, eager to get out into the world and manifest the change that we've all been talking about? How do we collect our reserves of energy? How do we keep our energy still with us despite all of this and use that energy well? I hope it's the latter. I hope we burst forth, and that this discussion today and many more like it will help all of us as we navigate a better future. I hope this was helpful to maybe spark some thoughts for you. And if you ask me tough questions, I'll give it a shot. But with great thanks, and I'll pass it back to Charles. Thank you.
Thank you, Celia. And that's interesting, you know, she just arrives in the organization and the whole world seems to be blowing up around her, which has revealed some things that were happening within the organization before she arrived and obviously ongoing. We have a moment for maybe one or two comments or questions. If there are questions, I would ask you put them to me directly. Send me a direct message in the chat room, and we'll go from there. See, it looks like you've left a lot of provocation with your question.
It's great when you go first and you're not yet warmed up. So good luck to the rest of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Celia. Our next speaker is Nathaniel Hanula James. Nathaniel is a recent graduate of the Humber Arts Administration program and had been working with a cohort of students with mass culture on some research on Indigenous Black people of color arts service organizations. I did put the video of their research in the chat room. I'm going to turn it over to Nathaniel.
It looks like Nathaniel has to restart his computer, Charles, so you may need to pause for a moment.
Do you want to start, Kathy?
So my name is Kathy Pierre, and I'm honored to be here today speaking in this like unreal setting. I'm speaking on behalf of Naomi, Stokes, Hindu, and Ashutosh. We are 5 students from Humber College's Arts Administration program and Cultural Management program. And this past semester, we collaborated with Mass Culture on a project called Woven Histories of Arts Service Organizations, IPOC edition. Mass Culture initially approached us with the idea of recording oral histories for arts service organizations as part of their ongoing research project in partnership with Ryerson University in a digital mapping of arts service organizations across Canada. The five of us decided to focus on IPOC organizations when it became apparent that there was a significant lack of data about these organizations. There was a dearth of stories and information about the origins of IPOC art service organizations and the incredible work that they were doing and their needs and hopes for the future. Where this information did exist, it tended to be because of a local project or initiative as opposed to on a national level. In our work, we were able to speak with 8 arts leaders from across the country: Charles Smith, who we all know from CPAMO, who graciously invited us to present to you today; Karen Carter from the Black Artists Network in Dialogue; Alika Hall from NIA Center; David Woods from Black Arts Network of Nova Scotia; Susan Wang from the Montreal Chinese Culture and Arts Foundation; and Caden Douglas from BIPOC TV and Film; and Francis Tamanapa and Chris Kelly from Primary Colors. We heard about David Woods driving around Nova Scotia in the early 2000s to connect with Black artists, as he built the first Black art exhibition in that province. Chris and France as well, as Charles Smith spoke to us about the amazing things that can happen when Black and Indigenous artists of color come together to learn and exchange in an environment where they don't have to perform for whiteness. Alika told us about the incredible work NIA Center's Wellness Connect program has done for fostering young people's mental health during the pandemic. We learned that Susan Wang and the Montreal Chinese Culture and Arts Foundation contributed masks and PPE to health centers and international students during the pandemic. BIPOC TV and Film's Caden Douglas encouraged us as young people to get on boards early. Band Karen Carter's shared incredible stories from her career, taught us that nothing is wasted, and encouraged us to be fearless. We learned about challenges in funding and interacting with white institutions, but we also learned about incredible triumphs, new partnerships made, and artists given when artists are given a platform. These are some of the examples of the richness of these interviews. All the videos which have been captured and transcribed are now on Mass Culture's website for you to watch, listen to, and read. And we thank you, Charles, for putting the link in the chat. Our main takeaways from this project were indeed to decenter whiteness in our arts landscape, and of course, and the decentering which will involve dominant white institutions giving up power and funding so that the IPOC organizations, whether they're new or whether they've been forging a path for decades, have the resources to grow and blossom and breathe. We also learned a lot about the unequal distribution of resources between IPOC organizations and urban centers. For instance, the organizations trying to provide services in small and more rural communities. One thing that really struck out to us doing this research was the enthusiasm expressed by these arts leaders we interviewed. They had not been asked or had rarely been asked to tell their stories, certainly not on a national level. Yet here they are doing amazing work and putting the lie to the white artistic mainstream's old lament, oh, we can't find IPOC organizations, leaders, artists, arts managers. On a collective note, and this is Nathaniel's quote, and a personal one, I wish I had known about these organizations as a young artist in theater schools, looking for mentorship and connections. And I can only imagine that holds true for present and future emerging artists in training institutions or otherwise across the country. This project also connected the organizations to each other. Several of the leaders we interviewed were curious about who else was taking part in the project, and we hope that this will lead to future collaborations and sharing of information. We need more research, archiving, and promoting these stories, as well as translations of these stories into statistical data, not only the stories of IPOC ASOs, but IPOC artists, organizations across the artist landscape. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Kathy, Naomi, Ashutosh, and Nathaniel is now back, thankfully. If there are any questions or comments, and I would encourage you to look at the video, actually very well done, and really does tell the story. So you have on one hand, Celia saying, we need to really work with, well, here are organizations to work with. It's part of the balance that we're looking at, is how to have organizations from the IPOC communities in positions where they can actually work directly with. And so the issues around funding are always rather critical, as well as the issues around their stories. I'm not seeing any questions or comments, so I'm going to move on to our next speaker. Thank you, you folks, for that one. Our next speaker is Barry Houston. Barry is the executive director of the National Ballet of Canada, and which is in an interesting moment at this point in time, as we all are with COVID, but also going through rather remarkable steps in terms of balancing its past with where it wants to go in its future, which would include equity, diversity, anti-racism, inclusion, and pluralism. So Barry, I don't know where you are, but hey, you're up.
I'm here. Hi, Charles.
Hi.
Of course, want to join thanks to Charles and to Kevin and to everyone at CPAMO for putting this together and for inviting me to be part of the conversation today. Just to get this out of the way, I identify as a white male American Canadian with European ancestry, cis, hetero, able-bodied Christian, and I'm running a historically white ballet company. So there's that. I just want to get that on the table. My hope is that I can be all of those things and still be part of the solution for a more just, equitable, and diverse society through my work as an arts leader. I've had the good fortune of serving as a co-CEO of the National Ballet of Canada with Karen Kane for more than 7 years. Earlier in my career, I had the opportunity to serve as the first executive director of a company called Complexion's Contemporary Ballet in New York City. I was attracted to the company because I had grown up in the very white world of classical ballet since childhood, and Complexions was the first ballet company I'd seen that fully embraced multiculturalism as central to its mission. When I saw the company perform for the first time, I was excited to see a company that reflected society, different body types, skin tones, ethnic backgrounds, all performing together at the highest levels of artistic excellence. When I came to Canada in 2014, I was pleased to see that the National Ballet, while not nearly as diverse as Complexions, was more visibly diverse than any other ballet company I had worked for on stage and behind the scenes. Make no mistake, it was still a white majority, but having the company based in one of the most culturally diverse cities in the world suggested that change was possible here and that we could build on the progress that had already been made. Karen focused on continuing to identify and recruit non-white talent for the company, and over the last several years, we've engaged with industry peers to crack open the historic inequities in the art form. The company participated in a 3-year cohort of 20 major North American ballet companies who met twice annually to share, learn, and find better ways to move forward. Called the Equity Project, Increasing the Presence of Blacks in Ballet, the program was created and facilitated by the International Association of Blacks in Dance, Dance USA, and Dance Theatre of Harlem. As that program got underway in 2018, here in Toronto, the National Ballet entered into a partnership with Charles, Kevin, and Cultural Pluralism in the Arts Movement Ontario to work with the company to develop a multi-year EDIP institutional plan. The first significant work with CPAMO was to conduct an environmental scan of the field. Charles had one-on-one meetings with leaders from major ballet companies around the world to better understand what was happening and not happening in making ballet a more diverse, equitable, and accessible art form. Following that study, we began a series of stakeholder meetings with staff, artists, and board members to obtain feedback about this work and to build a community of support for the work as a shared value. We assembled a task force of 20 staff, artists, volunteers to work with CPAMO in developing and implementing the plan. And then George Floyd was brutally murdered on May 25th, 2020, filmed for the world to see. Organizations, including the National Ballet, use social media to express solidarity with the Black community, but those statements of solidarity rang empty for many. Artists around the world began speaking out about their experiences. Corps de Ballet member Nicholas Rose called out our company on Instagram for putting out a statement, but not reaching out to our Black artists and employees to make sure they were okay. He also shared his pain growing up as a Black queer man in classical ballet. What we realized in that moment was that all of the EDIP plans in the world won't fix the problem if we don't focus on the lived experiences of our artists and staff, not in a 5-year plan, but every single day. Over the next days and weeks, we brought the entire company together to support Nicholas and to crack open real conversations about the kind of community we all want to be a part of. and what our personal responsibility is to building a truly anti-racist community. We have a long way to go and the work continues, but I've learned a few truths along the way. First, as a leader, know what you don't know and surround yourself with people who do. Second, representation is one thing, but not the only thing. Third, having an EDIT plan is meaningless if you don't live your values every single day. Fourth, as arts organizations, we have to make space for this work. COVID has created important space, but once we return to theaters and to the work, we must be intentional in ensuring that we keep this work centered. Fifth, we're going to make mistakes. It's going to be messy, and if it feels comfortable, we're probably not doing it right. Sixth, this work can't be done in a siloed nature. Every single stakeholder needs to lean in and take responsibility. That includes board, staff, artists, donors, everyone. Seventh, having a plan is important for accountability, but this work is not a project or a strategy. It is a commitment to center values of equity, diversity, inclusion, and pluralism in every decision we make. We must live this work every day. Today, our work at the National Ballet continues. The dancers have created a dancer affinity group, a safe space for artists to discuss workplace culture and make recommendations to management that reflect our shared values. We've launched a speaker series and have invited leadership from ballet companies across the country to join us to learn. Our first speaker was Teresa Ruth Howard, a former ballerina and activist who founded MOB Ballet. And most recently, we welcomed Seika Boya, a Canadian researcher who has conducted intense and comprehensive research on the history of Blacks in dance in Canada. If you don't know these two incredible women, I encourage you all to learn more about their work. We've provided mandatory anti-racism training for all artists and staff led by Charles, Kevin, and the CPAMO staff. Teresa meets monthly with our artistic staff to provide anti-bias training and to help unpack issues around repertoire, casting, costumes, studio culture, and the stories we tell. We have lunch and learns for artists and staff in sort of a book club format where everyone reads a recommended book or watches a film or digital content, and a dialogue is facilitated around that content. This is a purely staff-driven initiative, and an upcoming lunch and learn will feature a visit from the acclaimed Indigenous author, Tanya Talaga, who will be discussing her award-winning book, Seven Fallen Feathers. Over the pandemic, we have introduced two IBPOC choreographers, Kevin Ormsby and Jara Wolf, both of whom have created dance films as part of our Digital Spotlight series during the pandemic. Next season, we will welcome a new creation from Vanessa Montoya, and our own first soloist, Cipe November, will have his first choreographic commission from the National Ballet. We're going to keep at this work with intensity, transparency, respect, and intentionality. When we stumble, we're going to get back up and we're going to keep working. Thanks for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Barry. We've heard from three speakers thus far who've really provided some incredible insights into the work that they've been doing, whether within their arts organizations like the Ballet Company and Luminato, and then in service organizations led by Indigenous Black people of color. So I'm going to throw a question to any of the panelists, and that could include, Kathy, Naomi, their colleagues, around how do you build the relationship? What steps are important between building that question to that relationship between, let's say, these service organizations and an organization like Luminato or like the Ballet Company? We're going to hear from Fall for Dance North in a minute, and then also from Workman Arts. So I'm just going to throw that out there as to what steps to make these bridges happen and how to support and enable those IBPOC service organizations to be stable.
I'll try to answer that. I think it's obviously an onion, and so it's multi-layered. I also think that the educational institutions need to partner with these art service organizations, so there's that connection. I think doing research is incredibly important, and white institutions that have the money can help with that sort of research to find out about these are art service organizations and give them a platform. Fall for Dance North and other companies that I know of are collaborating with IPOC artists and have been collaborating with IPOC artists. It just needs to happen more frequently and more consistently over a long period of time. I don't think we solve this. I feel like the last year we were trying to solve this very fast, as Celia had mentioned in her talk. But this has been around for 400 plus years. So we can't change it overnight. What we can do is try to stay as consistent as possible so it becomes normalized. I think it's really important that equity becomes normalized, that when we're looking at a stage, when we're looking at board of directors, when we're looking at institutions, that we just see a kaleidoscope of colors of representation, and that becomes normal. And until that becomes normal, we won't have change, because the voices just need to be at the table in order for those gaps to close. I don't know if that really is a solution, but I think if we're patient with the steps that everybody is taking, we have 110 people on this Zoom call. If every single organization on this Zoom call added 3 to 4 more people of color at every level, not just on stage, not just on their boards, not just in their education outreach programs, but every single program, and you added 5 new people that were people of color, that is going to change your organization drastically and quite quickly. But you need to do it year after year after year after year. And that's the work I feel like as a former artist and as someone who's pursuing a career in arts management, that's what needs to be done. And if you also tie with these institutions across our country that have these programs like the Humber program, and hire IPOC arts managers inside your arts organizations and cultivate and develop these arts managers, you'll have more diversity just by being.
Thank you. Celia or Barry, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Kathy. I would also say that it's also about where we choose to put our energy and our money. You know, we tend to always think, I'm speaking generally, we tend to always think short-term and immediate, results. And if we're into producing stuff, you produce work, but the best thing is to get that stuff produced and an audience to experience it. That might not be the best thing. It might be, longer development, both of the stories and the concepts and the artist's capacity and the audience's interest and ability to comprehend and be absorb and be changed by the work. So you have to have sort of a larger lens on it. And I think also how we set up our organizations is very siloed. Are you a fundraiser or are you a programmer? As opposed to maybe you're both. Maybe actually you can tell stories that could tap into other communities that could just change how people are accessing us. We also think of ourselves as producing a consumable content as opposed to changing lives and changing systems. So we produce, and then we produce the next thing. So I think it comes right back to that. And absolutely, the people around the table in long-term relationships and the people not at the table and our relationships with them, unpack all of that. If you want to actually, if the end result, you want the result of all of our efforts to be a different world, if that's where you think we're going.
Thank you. Barry?
Yeah, I'll just say, I think intentionality is obviously key. And time, I think in the larger institutional context, what I worry about is that over the last 14 months, we've really leaned into this work in an important way in terms of engaging the entire National Ballet community in these conversations. And what worries me is that as we get back to the theater and we get back to touring around the world and commissioning new work in a highly unionized environment, we've got multiple unions that are part of this organization where time is very regimented, when we can have meetings, when we can communicate, when we can't, et cetera, that making sure that with intentionality, we create that time within the structure to continue those conversations, because it'll be very easy to get back to sort of what was, and these things sort of get pushed to the margins. And that's not, as a leader, it's part of my responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen. So that's what I would say worries me a bit as we begin to look toward a recovery from this pandemic.
Charles, may
Yes.
I make a comment on that?
Very quickly, yeah.
Sorry. Barry, speaking to, as someone who studied ballet and pursued it as part of my career and left it because I didn't see myself in it. When it comes, I think the slide back into what you're speaking of, you also have to recognize certain parts of our ballet culture that just needs to be eradicated, right? So things like blackface, the ways in which people of color are represented on stage in certain really classical pieces, unfortunately, might need to go in order to make room, and in order for us to reconcile with some of the harmful and traumatic ways that ballet has harmed people of color by representing cultures in a certain stereotypical and prejudiced way. And that's going to be really hard to change because people love the Nutcracker. People love, and there are problematic parts of those ballets that I love and grew up with that we have to reconcile. And I think that's across the board in a lot of art. You have to look at ways that we have celebrated traumatic art, and maybe we need to rethink and reframe how we present that, or if we present.
I totally agree with you, and I think over the last few months, the dancer affinity group that's been meeting monthly is actually talking about they're carving out time to talk about the stories we tell and the problematic stories that we tell, and what we can do to sort of tell those stories, either abandon those stories completely. Some of them need to go. I totally agree with that. But then are there other ways to tell stories in a way that is really reflective of today and tomorrow? And I think those conversations are being cracked open, and you're 100% right. It's got to be a focus.
Thank you. I'm going to call Ilter Ibrahimov, the CEO of Fall for Dance North. There are some questions coming in to me directly, which is wonderful, but they seem to be questions that I think all the panelists can answer or have comments on. So I'm going to hold on those questions until we've actually heard the next two speakers. So Ilter, wherever you are, you're up.
Here I am. Thank you, Charles. And hi, everyone. Really, really enjoying this conversation, all the panelists and what you have shared, and this, especially the last conversation we just had, prompted by the question from the audience. Full transparency, Kathy and I actually worked together pretty closely at Fall for Dance North, where she's also interning with us, and really, really proud of you, Kathy, and all your comments, really appreciate it. So trying to build upon that a little bit here is, again, wonderful to be with you. Really appreciate you, Charles and Kevin, and the entire CPAMO team for inviting myself and our organization to the panel. Yeah, again, my name is Ilter Ibrahimov, and in addition to being the artistic director, I'm the co-founder of our organization, Fall for Dance North. And my personal and professional journey, I would say, is very much intertwined with our organization's short history and where we are today, with the framework of how we are looking at these important conversations for now and in the future. As someone who was born and raised in Turkey and immigrated to North America some 23 years ago, I was counting that again this morning, hard to believe, 23 years ago now, I have a unique lived experience and perspective on life. And this is the case for every individual that is part of our organizational family, led by our staff and board members. We all have a unique story to tell, a unique outlook on life, and our own way of responding to cultural and societal changes. And for me, that is the key value that we all bring to the table. The fact that we're still, Fall for Dance North is still fairly new. We're producing our 7th annual festival this year, perhaps gives us a little bit of opportunity here to write an organizational history and culture that is hopefully future looking and is built on empathy and transparency. Last spring, the COVID-19 pandemic, plus the global call for social and racial justice, once again proved that we all have a lot of work to do. Realizing and acknowledging Paul Verdansk Noord's privileged place for us was one of the first steps. And as one of the fastest growing presenting organizations with now significant resources and reach, we as a team decided to look back at our short history and examine how we can improve upon what we have already built. And that's when we reached out to CPAMO, and we worked with Charles and his team to address our current policies, practices, and I think most importantly, the relationships with one another and within our community. The guided work we did and are still doing together brought our team members much closer together, helped us have many open and honest conversations where everyone, I hope, felt safe to share their thoughts and opinions, challenge others, and ask questions. For the first time, all our stakeholders, I felt, board members, committee members, staff members, were part of one vital conversation. By the end of the reporting process, again, with CPAMO's help, we made a list of 6 action items that will act as a guide in the next few years to create tangible change in our organization as we continue to build a foundation for our young festival. The action items are all designed as base strategies towards anti-Black racism, equity, diversity, and inclusivity in our organizational practices and programming. And for me, these action items all have relationship building at the core. They have to do with making sure that our organizational purpose, message, and goals are clearly defined, communicated, transparent, and very important to me, that it's authentic. They have to do with deepening our connections with the artistic community and other arts organizations, such as presenting colleagues, and expanding that network to welcome new relationships and partnerships and curatorial voices and perspectives. This is an ongoing conversation and work that will continue to grow, change, and guide us into the future. It's a long-term commitment with hopefully long-term results. Our organization has so much work to do, and we want to be part of other organizations' work and conversations as well. We don't want to do this alone and in silo. And we're slowly but surely seeing already some changes, some positive changes and shifts in our organization. Just last night, actually, we had our AGM where 2 new board members from diverse backgrounds were voted in. And this is something that was much needed and discussed at length through the work that we did with CPAMO and internal conversations that we had with our team. We're about to premiere a really momentous work, a new short film on June 1st directed and conceived by AC Mensa that features 14 Black dance artists from across Canada, hoping to create space and amplify their voices and stories. This is something that is our brainchild, and we co-commissioned and executive produced it with Harbourfront Center. And together our 2 organizations invited and enlisted 19 other dance presenters and networks from coast to coast to support the film, which is, I don't think, ever happened in our country. We're very proud of this, let's call it small step we're taking as a collective. But the process, as Celia also mentioned for one of their projects that they're working on, has been both really challenging as well as rewarding. At the core of it, it's been about, again, building relationships with empathy, care, and deep listening. And this is the kind of work that we are committed to and want to keep investing in and collaborate on. So a bit of an open call to this group and beyond. If we have any ideas for projects that we can work on together, conversations that we can have, please give us a call anytime. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ilter. Any questions, comments? Comments in the chat room. And I guess one question is, how can we see the production?
This particular production that I mentioned will be online, streaming free on June 1st, and I will put it in the chat room, the website that we're building, which is going to be basically the digital stage for the project.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? We're okay. Okay, we'll come back. We have some questions that I think all people can respond to at the end. Thank you, Ilter. And our final speaker for this morning, Kelly Schrawn, who is the Artistic Director at Workman Arts. Kelly, where are you?
I'm right over here. Hello.
There you go. I'm fine. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me. This has been such a wonderful conversation to be a part of. So I'm Kelly Schrawn. I'm the Executive Artistic Director of Workman Arts. So I have to be totally transparent. This talk makes me a bit nervous. It's a bit intimidating because in order to do it well, I need to be transparent about some of Workman Arts' challenges. I don't like the word failure because we're always growing and learning, and the jumping off point for change. In our case, it did come from something we did not handle well. So I will aim to be transparent and know that this is a space of sharing and learning, and talking about challenges is how we grow. Also, in thinking about this presentation, I decided to focus on the mental health side because neurodiversity is an important part of the work we are all doing with diversity and equity and inclusion. So I will sort of focus my conversation in that direction. So Workman Arts is an art and mental health organization that serves artists living with mental health and or addiction issues. We call this lived experience. So our artists are called members, but there is no cost to join Workman Arts. Members is simply a way to identify someone as having lived experience. To join as a member at Workman Arts, there's no doctor referral needed or confirmation of diagnosis. They simply identify as having lived experience. So anyway, once they are a member, they gain access to free art classes, to art studio space, to a recording studio, to a theater, gear, materials. Right now, we have over 500 members. And we actually just moved into a brand new building at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, CAMH as it's known. We are connected to the hospital, but we are our own separate organization. Okay, so prior to this year, in terms of conflict resolution, what we had in place was, in retrospect, an outdated model. We had policies and procedures for staff conflict, and we had a code of conduct that members agreed to when joining the organization. So why I say this was outdated is because we had changed how people engaged with our organization. We had multiple engagement points that many times overlapped. So over the last few years, we've prioritized moving members into instructor roles in our art training program so that classes are always taught by artists with lived experience. We added what we call active listeners in the classroom. This is someone that is on hand should people need any mental health support before or during or after class. This role was increasingly filled by members with a background or an interest in social work or peer support roles. We also added in a major program within CAMH called our Art Cart program, where we hired numerous members to run classes in the units at CAMH. We also had member staff members. We had member board members. It was a rich tapestry of involvement at Workman Arts that overlapped a number of roles. So there was no longer the divide of board, staff, and membership. And so we needed a policy and procedure that served the whole organization. So, of course, at times, many times, when you're underprepared, that's when conflict arises and pokes a big gaping hole in your organization. I know I'm not alone in this path. So indeed, we had a conflict arise between member staff member and a member board member that also had the added layer of the conflict being a claim of microaggression related to race. Now, I say that it's an added layer because in this case, what is often the case with microaggressions, it's an accumulation of behavior over time. If you're dealing with microaggression for the first time at the executive or board level, it means you've failed, and we failed to identify it earlier. So as a result of this incident, we started working with Charles, and we worked with CPAMO to help us navigate the conflict, to help update our policies and procedures, to develop a conflict resolution process that accurately reflects the ways in which people engage with our organization, and that helps us identify microaggressions in real time. So in tandem, we engaged in a process of embedding diversity, equity, and inclusion knowledge and action in our organization by analyzing the ways in which our organization contributes to white supremacy and dismantle it through initiatives that center IPOC individuals. I'm actually going to pause there because I promised you a chat about neurodiversity. And while we did and are doing a lot of work with centering IPOC individuals within our organization, I would need longer than this 10 minutes to discuss those details. And I really do want to focus this conversation on neurodiversity because I do think it's a really important lens to add to the conversation. So when we were working with Charles, we spoke about the need for conflict resolution, to be mindful that our organization has a mental health focus and uses a trauma-informed lens. So trauma-informed means essentially that rather than assume that people are blank slates entering a situation, let's assume that they are as complex as they are, and that there's a good chance that conflict could bring feelings of trauma to the surface. So let's conduct ourselves in the most empathetic way possible to minimize the negative impacts on mental health on both sides of the conflict, truly. So being trauma-informed, let me be clear, being trauma-informed does not mean there are no consequences or there are no boundaries. It is a lens by which you enter into the difficult conversation to make sure that people are supported in the process. So for example, we now offer assistance in writing a formal letter of complaint. This can be difficult or triggering for some individuals to do it alone. We support complainants and respondents with active listeners after a difficult conversation, that kind of thing. So as part of our policy update, we also formalized a section of our staff meetings to create space to talk about conflict happening either within the membership or within the organization. So we've been doing this in an informal way, but we needed a more formal lens. As you can imagine, with 500 plus members, conflict can be, a fairly constant thing. So now at staff meetings, we flag issues of concern, we decide whether if an incident report should be created. We can track recurring conflict over time. We ask questions about whether we should be entering into a conflict resolution process, that kind of thing. So as a side note, this was part of the failing of the conflict incident that I mentioned before. Staff was aware there was a problem, but didn't inform upper management because there wasn't an adequate process to do so. So creating space at the staff meeting was and is an important part of the conflict resolution process. We also added a complaint form to our website so that members, staff, volunteers, anyone could have easier access to the process, especially if they felt they couldn't go to a staff member or a board member for whatever reason. So in addition to the policies, we thought it was really important to add in regular training sessions for people who engage with our organization so they can be aware of our values and maybe become aware of their own biases and behavior. So we offer regular training in anti-oppression, anti-bias, anti-sanism, and anti-ableism, trauma-informed care, and boundary setting. So this is really a productive complement to the conflict process. Can we stop it before it even begins? We chose to make conflict resolution part of an overall process rather than just a document that lives in the HR folder. Of course, because we implemented and updated conflict and resolution policies and added in more effective reporting mechanisms and added in training I mean, it doesn't mean that our conflicts magically go away. It's something you're always working on, reviewing policies, because organizations change, the people change, the work changes. We are all working virtually right now, and classes are happening virtually. And for example, like right now, we are looking at our policies from an anti-saneism lens. So saneism is oppression and discrimination against people who are thought to have a mental illness or a difference, a mental difference. This discrimination can, in truth, quite easily arrive in conflict resolution, because anytime you're dealing with punishment for a behavior, it can create an environment of saneism. So the work on our policies and code of conduct continues as it should. And I would encourage all organizations to do at least an annual review of policies. So I think that fills my 10 minutes. So I'm going to leave it there for today, but we do have our policies and our code of conduct on our website. We have our diversity, equity, and inclusion policy on our website. We try to be as transparent as possible, so you can certainly go there to find out more about Workman Arts and about our policies and procedures. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. And it was good that you mentioned that your policies and procedures are online. I can assume that is the same for Fall for Dance North and Luminato and the National Ballet. There was a question that was asked. Do you have your policies, particularly around harassment, discrimination, posted online so that people can access them easily if they need to use them, or just to know that the organization has that? I'm accepting that as you do. There is a question, though, Kelly, directly to you, around the term anti-saneism. Is it a word to describe anti-people with mental illness? Can you get a bit more into what that term means?
Carving out that space when we're back to that kind of intensity is more a challenge that I worry about, unless, I think we can get at it with each union partner over time, but I don't think the unions are the problem in getting it right. It's really management's commitment to deciding what we're not going to do so that we can make the space. And that's, I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Mary. Anyone else on either the union question or dealing with members? And also websites. I know ILTR, for example, Fall for Dance North has a real basket of policies and procedures. And are those on your website?
They are, yes, they are accessible through different links right at the footer of our website. So wherever you're on our website, you can always find them in the footer.
Thank you.
That's, ffdnorth.com if anybody would like to visit.
So there is that question hanging in the air about membership of organizations that may be overwhelmingly or predominantly white. And how do you deal with that in terms of bringing things forward? To bring about this change where sometimes members have very strong influence over what organizations do and don't do.
I don't have a specific answer to that, Charles, but it kind of relates to my provocation about, a lot of conversations going on, people actually thinking through what the impact will be, and in many cases, I think that the people running the shows will be moving out and other people will be running the show. And in terms of membership organizations, it may have been created at a certain time to serve a certain group, but it may no longer be relevant or essential. So I think there's going to be pruning and change. I think the assumption, just at the moment we're in right now, the pressure of this pandemic is coming out of it. If anybody thinks we're going back to what we had before, then I don't think they've been paying attention. I also think it's an opportunity for change. Like, we should use this as a moment not like before. So what are our essential services, whether it's a member organization or a service organization or whatever it is? What is our essential service to the broader community, and who helps us figure that out, and who gets to decide? I think that's all open. We should use this moment.
I think the issue also goes beyond members to looking at the arts ecology in the focus that currently is on Indigenous artists, artists of color, queer artists, artists who have mental health challenges and so on, where sometimes I hear people say, oh, when is this going to be over? Oh, why don't they just, and so you have, again, the student group who did some incredible research for mass culture. And I wonder, what's the tension in the arts environment around providing the kind of access to resources that IPOC artists, queer artists, artists who do suffer from mental health challenges face? Are people open to sharing? Aria began our morning talking about the dish with one spoon treaty. Any comments? I raised it because there is conflict in community. Let's be honest about it. There are white artists who are feeling today, I'm not getting a fair share because of these priority groups, because of these funding. Meanwhile, you have quote unquote priority groups saying the bucket of funds that are available to us are so small. We work project to project and we're hustling and tired.
We see a comment from Kathy Peer in the chat, specifically targeted towards large organizations on the call. Are you addressing the grant inequities with our councils? And I would also reframe it to say, are you or have you thought about how you could address the grant inequities with our councils as part of a conflict? And are you going to become an advocate for funding fairness? Because funding fairness then becomes also a conflict. I'm throwing that out as a question that anyone could also jump on, because I do believe we're going to be going into the workshop process, which again, these questions will come up at the idea of what exactly is conflict? What exactly is the idea of how do we mitigate, but also support persons who raise issues that are related to conflict?
I can start that off, Barry, if you want to go second. But yeah, I mean, I have had the opportunity over the last year to talk to a lot of people in power. And I've been asking them a couple of questions. First of all, like, why is it that we have this size of pie? And we need to divide the pie among more. So why can't we have a larger pie? Why is traditionally the Minister of Culture or the Minister of Heritage one of the weakest members around the cabinet table? Why is it that the larger, powers that be don't see arts and culture as a major force for positive change in our community, or change period? Why are we not investing in our storytellers and our experiences as part of a larger social, mental health, physical investment? Because, if we need to share. But if the pie keeps getting smaller and we're trying to share it, yeah, we'll have conflict among each other. Absolutely. And that's where we are. And we need to deal with that. And we need to be better at sharing this pie. But if the pie keeps getting smaller, then, we're actually not serving our larger purpose. So I see relatively little collaboration across the country among the arts community to actually address this larger issue. We all fight for ourselves. We don't collaborate. There's sort of a small and big or in and out conflict, but what about the larger challenge ahead of all of us? Like, about what's our service to the larger community and how is that valued? And that does relate to public policy and funding. So if I was the Minister of Heritage, I'd be making the very big argument that recovery from this pandemic is based in investment in humanity and who we are, which is based in arts and culture, shared experiences, storytelling, feeding back to ourselves our stories. So that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. I think we're going to wrap there because we're going to get into some a workshop session around these things. And I think it's important to emphasize that point, Celia, that you said so well, about the historic inequities and what does equity really mean at the end of the day. People have heard us say this from CPAMO before, that if we're going to reach that outcome of we're all equal, then organizations like ours or the ones that Kathy and her group presented need to be at the same level as organizations that have been around for 50 odd, 60 years, because we were blocked. Right? And truly, and I think that that's the advocacy that needs to come from the arts community. Not that we are playing catch up forever, but that there's a clear strategy in place to say these organizations will be where the ones we funded from 19 creation of Canada Council and other arts councils at that level. within this period of time, and I'm going to say this here, whether there's new money or not. Right? And that's an issue of conflict, right? Because, you know, those of us from our communities are saying we cannot wait any longer. We've lost generations of artists because of the inequities.